Before we start today's program, I'll just give a plug for our September 13th program. Jefferson County Public Schools Acting Superintendent Marty Polio will be our speaker. That will probably sell out, so do reserve early. Please turn off all your electronic devices so that the broadcast portion of the meeting will not be interrupted. We'll show respect for our panelists, no cheering, no jeering, no table talk, okay? At this time, I'm going to introduce our moderator, our very own Joe Arnold.
Thank you. You are. Okay. Hey everybody, thank you for being here. Appreciate that. I should point out, and Aaron Yarma, thanks for accepting my invitation for being here. I was once named Best TV News Hair in Leo Weekly, so that was my bona fides for today's conversation. I think are pretty well set. Well, even before we begin, I think even our title is fraught with some perilous language. What is fake news versus real news? The term fake news applied to clickbait. Online fictional articles which exploded during last year's presidential election as some scamming entrepreneurs took advantage of the Facebook business model, which generates income per click. So going viral was the point, not any facts or accuracy. Well, since then, the term fake news has been co-opted, especially more recently by President Trump, for news coverage regarded as flawed or biased. So what does it all mean? I'll leave it up to our panel. The bona fides, so to speak, of our esteemed panel could fill the entire hour, so I have taken the liberty of editing their introductions. A career in TV news trains you to do things in 90 seconds or less. Since 2013, Brendan McCarthy has been managing editor of the Kentucky Center for Investigative Reporting from Louisville Public Media. He previously worked at the Times-Picayune in New Orleans and the Chicago Tribune, a brief stint in TV as well. A finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, has won a George Polk Award and a regional Emmy. Bill Lamb, the president and GM of WDRB Media in Louisville, VP of Broadcast Operations for Block Communications, overseeing 9 TV stations, including WDRB, one of the top 10 Fox affiliates in the country, and WBKI, the top-rated CW station in the country. Bill has received the prestigious Quill and Badge Award from the International Union of Police Associations, among many other awards. Scott Jennings is founding partner of RunSwitch PR, the largest PR agency in Kentucky, one of Kentucky's best-known conservative commentators. He is a CNN contributor. He writes a regular column for the Courier-Journal. Scott served as special assistant to President George W. Bush, has been a part of 4 presidential campaigns, dozens of others. He was an award-winning reporter, by the way, for WHIS Radio and the Kentucky News Network from 1996 through 2000. And finally, the director of the Institute for Rural Journalism and Community Issues since 2004, Al Cross, helps rural news media define the public agenda in their communities and report on broader issues that have local impact but few local sources. Al worked as a Courier-Journal reporter for some 26 years, including more than 15 as chief political writer. He writes a political column about twice a month for the Courier, as well as a KET, a political commentary. Among his many awards are the Kentucky Journalism Hall of Fame and a share of the 1989 Pulitzer Prize won by the Courier-Journal staff. We are going to begin with Mr. Cross, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Joe. I did not come with any prepared remarks because I know the Louisville Forum well. I know that the best comments usually come in response to questions. As Joe mentioned, the main title of the program today is a misappropriation. There is fake news out there, and technology means there will be a lot more fake news of which we mean to be aware. But I think the real topic of the program today is media bias. News media bias. That's always been an issue. But now we have a president and a governor who are putting it much higher on the public agenda. And they have convinced a sizable number of their supporters that journalists are their enemy. What they're essentially doing is mounting an attack on journalism that they don't like. And I think we have to cover them and comment on them in the same way we always have. I think Marty Barron of the Washington Post has set down a pretty good rule. We're not at war, we're at work. Let's do the work and let the work stand for itself. Now that is not as easy as it used to be. It never was really easy, but it's more difficult. There is less editing going on at newspapers, and I suspect at television stations and other online outlets than we've had in the past, because of the devolution of the newspaper model and even similar effects on broadcasting. The secret of journalism at the Courier-Journal, when Steve Ford and I worked there, was that, yes, there were probably more liberals in the newsroom than conservatives, but there were enough conservatives, especially on the copy desk, to act as gatekeepers, to wring out the bias. A lot of people don't understand that journalism is not an individual enterprise. It is a collective enterprise in which editors and reporters and executives work together to present the closest thing we can get to the truth every day. And the more people that have an opportunity to have input into assignments and to edit stories and think about their presentation, the more reliable, the more accurate, the more fair they're going to be. And I can see plenty of examples in newspapers in this town and other towns all across the country where lack of good editing has left news outlets open to accusations of bias. I'll leave it there and go on to the next panelist. Brendan?
Thanks, Al. So our organization through the last few months and through the next few months has been holding media literacy, fake news workshops, where we don't actually share fake news, but we talk to the community about this issue throughout Louisville through the Louisville Free Public Library System. And the one thing I hear over and over is, in this kind of disconnect, this term fake news. Okay? Well, I tell you, the one thing I'd like to plant in your head right now is this idea about what the definition of fake news could be. Right? Now, the definition I hold most true is actually a definition from a reporter who covers fake news as a beat, a gentleman actually at an online-only outfit called BuzzFeed. And he says there's three things that constitutes fake news. One, that it's false, undeniably false, not true, malarkey, baloney. Two, it was created with the knowledge that it's false, bad, no good. And three, that there was a financial incentive to creating that. Now, so when we talk about fake news, I think about the click mills that you may have heard about in Macedonia, especially in the lead up to the election. People that are creating just content that's bogus in order to get clicks. And that they found, over and over that the bogus material actually worked best for Donald Trump. It worked slightly less for quote, liberals or Hillary Clinton followers, but this was a very scientific, economic type content producing thing. It's not about the content per se of a local newsroom producing media, okay? Now, study after study shows that when it comes to producing this kind of information, we all exist in our echo chambers, right? We're all on Facebook for the most part. Our kids, especially young folks, Instagram, Snap, you can add them all on, right? But what's happening is this is coming amid this wild time of disruption in the media world. Al alluded to it. Journalism has been democratized. And that, I believe, is a great thing. We've got social media, right? There's a less concentration of power. We've got from the uprising Arab Spring to videos of police shootings to folks trying to find out, in New Orleans just the last week, whose neighborhood is flooding, can I return right now? But with all of that is this challenge on the economic end, right? Journalism institutions that help build this vital culture of democracy and accountability, of fair-minded, truth-telling journalism, of seriousness. Well, journalism that was about a public service. journalism that was here to enlighten you and tell you something, not sell you on something or sell something to you. This was journalism that followed a code of ethics, right? Well, now the lines are blurry and it's harder to tell the facts from the slanted reporting. I'm greatly concerned, especially about young people, whose skepticism, the click, retweet kind of culture is obviously much lower, and their real inability to discern what is real and fake. So we've got that as an economic, kind of a business challenge, and then now there's this political challenge that Al noted, right? George Orwell, the gentleman who wrote 1984, big in the news lately, sold out, actually reserved all the time at the library. He talked about this idea of what we kind of are talking about, fake news today, decades ago. This is not new, you know. And he wrote in 1946 that the political language is designed to make lies sound truthful, and that this political language consists largely of euphemism, question begging, and cloudy vagueness. Now, I don't think that has changed in politics through the years. We have some politicians here, folks who've covered political reporting. That hasn't changed. But politicians are smart. They have communication staff. Scott, right? Pew now says there's more than 6 public relations specialists for every journalist out there. You know, Joe? For every journalist, we're getting spun constantly. So, you know, these politicians, instead of talking about fake news like the folks in Macedonia who are making completely bogus articles in order to get a paycheck, they're applying this to honest reporting, okay? It's a story that they don't like, that doesn't fit their own narrative. Look, journalists are fallible, we're human beings, we do make mistakes, and any news organization worth its salt will correct them, okay? But that doesn't mean that journalists out there are working to create some fake news for you with some economic motive, okay? Right now, I'm concerned, I'm not incredibly optimistic about what's taking place. Leaders, just like they have for many, many years, are looking to delegitimize the media. Now technology has made it a lot easier. So you've got this confluence of fake news. Again, definitions of fake news are wide. And you're going to see it today, you'll see it tomorrow on Twitter, and your news stories from your politicians, whoever they may be. And then you're going to see, meanwhile, in newsrooms, this economic challenge of what's taking place. So we've got this confluence, that's where we are today. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Mr. Lane?
Well, thanks very much for having me on this panel today. I think the governor has suspended his dues in my fan club, so that doesn't seem to be going well. But listen, there is no dispute that there is fake news, that it exists. And as my colleagues here mentioned, it's part of it are these click mills that are deliberately putting out fake, sensational, audacious news in order to get people to click on the stories. That's happening. And then, and I don't include all bloggers, but when you look at lazy bloggers who don't verify their facts, they don't vet their stories, they just hit send, they're putting out a lot of fake news because they're not held to the same journalistic standards as real journalists. So that confuses the issue. The other thing that we should address is the bias in the media. And I will tell you, I believe that national media is very biased. I might not have agreed with that 5 years ago, but I do now. And if you ever called them on it, they would be outraged. What, us? Biased? Shame on you. Well, during this last presidential election cycle, they not only didn't deny it, they didn't care if you called them biased. They were flat out doing everything in their power to keep Trump from being elected. And it didn't work, but that's what they wanted to do. Locally, I have found through my career that local journalists, particularly radio and television, work very, very hard to be as unbiased as possible. I think most newspaper writers work very hard to be unbiased and truthful. Now, in all fairness, the Courier-Journal has proudly been a liberal publication since the 1930s. They really haven't denied it. That was Bingham's goal. He was proud of that. They owned that, and that's okay. It's okay to have a point of view or a perspective as long as you don't pretend that there's something wrong with it and hide from it. So, but I do believe that the journalists I've worked with in my career would be appalled if you told them that they had to be liberal or they had to be conservative. They just want to, their only bias is toward a good story. But along comes Donald Trump, who has changed the relationship between the presidency and the media, maybe forever, I hope not. But he has gone directly to people through Twitter, and he has declared everything that is not flattering and favorable to be fake news. He wants to tell you what's news. And his little mini-me, Matt Bevin, is taking a page out of that same book. He wants to tell you what's news. And if it's not flattering, if it's not fawning, it's fake. And, you know, that's a problem. And there's two reasons for this, that I think this exists. Either they're both very, very thin-skinned and cannot accept criticism or anything that's not flattering, or they have or plan to have something to hide. And so they want to be able to control the media. Well, listen, in fascist dictatorships and in communist countries, the people at the top can control the media. They can control the message that gets out, and they can control what doesn't get out. But in our country, our founding fathers created the First Amendment. And take note, it wasn't the Fourth, it wasn't the Seventh or the 10th. It was the First Amendment because they felt it was that important that the media hold government and government officials accountable. So that's protected. So people like Trump and people like Bevin, who can't control the media that way, have developed another strategy, and that is to discredit the media. To make it seem as though everything is fake. I think that's very, very dangerous for our country. But when they can convince you, or at least in their own minds convince themselves that everything is fake, then they can pretend to take the high road and not engage with the vermin reporters. Well, I'm telling you, this is a very, very bad turn, and we just have to keep trying to report the truth and telling the truth. I think that when people are trying to control the media or discredit the media so they can hide from the media and don't have to stand up and answer any questions, let alone tough ones, I think those people are people we have to watch closer than anyone who came before them. That's my thought.
I'm going to be brief. I only hear what Bill Lamb has to say more, because I'm sure everybody in the back does as well. But I pulled up a chart here that I wanted to talk about, because I think there's a couple of issues that are at play that I can comment on. One is, I'm a conservative on the panel here today, and a practitioner of the arts of dealing with reporters on behalf of clients. And I've been dealing with reporters on behalf of politicians for many years. And so I can tell you that I do believe I have encountered, as Bill said, reporters who definitely had a bias against the client or politician that I was representing. And so my job is to try to give them the best possible defense in those interactions. I also think that the concept of perceived bias in the news media is presently not confined to one political party. I think when we talk about these issues, most people think that all Republicans think the media is biased, but no Democrats do. There was a Pew Research study that came out the other day that was highlighted in the Wall Street Journal. And I was amazed at this study because the views of the press among both political parties was underwater. I think 86% of Republicans had a negative view of the press, and 43% 4% of, 46% of Democrats did, but only 44% had a positive view. So for people in both parties, their perceptions of the media industry were underwater, meaning more people thought negatively of it than positively. So I think when we talk about these issues, we should think about it from the perspective of, is it confined to one party, or, as the writer in the Wall Street Journal asked, have most news consumers already concluded that a great deal of what they're reading is fake or should be called into question? That was the thesis of his column, and I encourage you all to look it up. I think the other thing that we should talk about is, beyond just the realm of journalism, it's the concept of whether or not Americans right now have confidence in anything. I look at the Gallup Confidence in Institutions Survey. It comes out every summer. And every summer I look at it and I get very, very concerned, because it shows year after year after year that we have a crisis of confidence in just about every major institution in our culture. There was a CNN survey this week, many of you may have seen it, regarding President Trump's job approval. One of the questions of the survey was, do you trust anything, the information you're hearing coming out of the White House? And about 3/4 of people said they trusted some of it or none of it. And so there was a big deal being made about, well, people can't trust what they hear from the White House, so how can we trust the president to lead in a crisis? And I was asked about this on CNN the other night, and I pointed out, people don't just mistrust what they hear from the White House, they mistrust what they hear from everything. Gallup, this summer, views on newspapers, only 27% of Americans have confidence in newspapers. News on the internet, 16% of Americans have confidence in what they read on the internet. Television news, 24% of Americans have some kind of confidence in what they see in television news. So the concept of people mistrusting the White House, a president, a governor, an institution, it is not confined just to that institution. It is an epidemic of mistrust that we are facing in our society today. There's only 3 things people trust right now: the police, small business, and the military. They all score very well. Everything else is in, and I'll use a technical term, the crapper. Everything else is in the crapper. And we have to look inside of ourselves and ask, why? And what are we going to do about it? Congressman Yarmouth knows. It does the Congress, the federal government, the White House, nobody involved in public life any good at all. For all of the citizenry to look at all these institutions and say, you can't believe a word of what these people are telling you. It doesn't do him any good, it doesn't do Mitch McConnell any good, it doesn't do Donald Trump any good. So I think as we talk today, I want to explore, hopefully through some of your questions, what does it mean for a society to mistrust everything? Because that's where we are today. Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you all very much. By the way, you can also tweet your questions if you have your Twitter out, at Louisville Forum. Be happy to take a look at that, because we want to spread this as viral as possible and make some money off this thing, right? Oh no, that's not the reason we're here, is it? But certainly Lisa M. and Tom Van der Rothstein from our association and from our board are also collecting your questions. Before we get to the first question, though, let me ask about that profit motive, because Brendan brought up in his opening remarks that journalists are not in it to make money. At the same time, isn't the business model that I mentioned before with Facebook, and I'll ask this for anyone on the panel, maybe we'll start with the TV guy. Aren't you in it to make money, and aren't you paying attention to how many clicks that Facebook and those Twitter posts and WDRB.com get? How much of a factor does that go into establishing how successful a journalist is at his job, or her job?
Well, you know, the one thing that I will acknowledge right from the start is we are a business. We are a for-profit business. Every television station that's not associated with NPR or PBS is a for-profit business. So we have to make sure that the business is healthy, or we can't do anything else. So I would have to say that, yes, we're very profit motivated, but if we go about making a profit in the wrong way, we're going to kill ourselves. You know, the people who can best serve the community in a myriad of ways, but the television stations that can best serve the community are going to be the most successful. So that's why all of the TV stations and radio stations and newspapers. That's why one of the reasons we try to put so much back into the community, because we're trying to help the community, but we're also trying to keep our business solid. So let's not pretend that nobody is in it for the money, because we're for-profit businesses. And if we stop being that, then somebody else will be sitting here next year.
Well, I think you have to make a distinction between journalism and the news business. Journalists don't get into journalism to make money, but it's the news business that pays journalists to do that job. And every piece of the news business is under pressure because of the proliferation of media outlets. Everybody is hungry for audience. They're more in the business of giving people what they want than what they need than ever before. A wise newspaper editor once said, the trick is making them want what they need. Good presentation. But in the world in which we live now, with so many news outlets and that human nature drive to get confirmation of what you already believe, rather than information that might challenge those beliefs, it's a lot more difficult to make a business model work.
Yeah, actually, Joe, so to clarify though, I mean, when we're talking about fake news and the economic motive, I think all of us would agree here that if we did stories like, oh my God, you won't believe what Governor Matt Bevin said, or here's 30 things with cat photos, right? I mean, I click on cat photos. I know many of you do too, but that would be a more click-driven business motive. And I want to be clear that, you know, public media is funded. It's not that we don't think of these things, that we're not paying attention to metrics, but we are fueled by the community. If we were doing stories like that the community did not find value in, then we wouldn't exist. So yes, there's absolutely, no one is immune, as Al noted, from the economic situation of the news business. But as you see these stories in your Facebook feed, when you click on them and you're let down, think about that, what that serves for your community and serves for you.
My guilty conscience tells me I want to admit that when you said I click on cat photos, I immediately wanted to tweet that. You know, so let's go to our questions. Tom?
The first question is for the entire panel. Have you ever been taken in or fooled by a fake news story? And if so, what was it?
You want to own up to it?
Yeah, I was. I was taken. It wasn't a story. I was taken in by a fake Twitter account the other day. I thought it was a member of Congress, one of your colleagues in your conference, but the thing is, it was written in such a way that it made it sound like what the person would say. I retweeted it and made some pithy comment about it until it was pointed out to me that it was a fake account. So it wasn't a fake news story, but I was taken in by a fake Twitter account purporting to be a member of Congress recently.
We do have our first.
But I deleted it in a show of responsibility.
Did you own up that you had retweeted it in the first place?
No, I just deleted it. I'm owning up to it now.
Our first Twitter question. Is it possible for the media to regain any type of trust back when competing with the internet?
We're not competing with the internet. I mean, the internet is a platform, and it's the dominant platform. I think what the questioner is really asking is social media versus news media. Journalism, the essence of it, is a discipline of verification. There is no verification on social media. Journalists need to do a better job of explaining to people the difference in the kinds of media they consume. And journalists need to do a better job of defining what they do. You know, I catch myself saying media all the time. What I really mean is news media. There is a difference, a big one.
Joe, I think we have to continue to do the right things for the right reasons, honestly and straightforward, as journalism has done, you know, sporadically. There have not always been great journalists throughout history, but on a whole, journalists have held the scoundrels accountable. And we need to continue to do that. But I will say one thing about bias that I probably should have mentioned earlier. The best journalists I know are still human beings. And every human being comes to work every day with some sort of bias. And the best journalists probably hide it better than anyone else. But let's not pretend that any news organization can be completely unbiased, because the only way to do that is to figure out how to not have human beings compiling the news.
Right. Lisa?
All right, this is for the entire panel. If most people trust nothing, what should be done to get back that trust?
Okay.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think the problem is harder to solve because the journalists who are covering things today, I think, are feeling pressure to be fast and first. And we've seen, for instance, numerous times during the Trump administration where something has happened in the Oval or something has happened and a journalist immediately tweets it out, and 30, 45 minutes later, 60 minutes later, the whole story comes out and it wasn't either how they portrayed it, didn't happen, it wasn't the way it was portrayed. And then you go back and you look at the initial tweet and it says, Donald Trump, did something stupid in the Oval Office, got 90,000 retweets. And then an hour later it says, sorry, I messed up that last tweet, it didn't actually happen. And it's got like 4 retweets and they're all White House staffers, And so as long as the pressure exists to be first and fast, I think you're going to see mistakes continuing to be made like that, which exacerbates the trust issue. I wrote a column for Leo recently in which I was hearkening back to my first ever political campaign, the year 2000, in which I had to labor over a fax machine to send out press releases to newspapers all across the state by a certain deadline. Well, that is over. There are no deadlines. The deadline is right now. The deadline is 5 minutes ago. And so back in those days, it wasn't fast. Speed wasn't the issue. Today, speed is a huge issue, and speed causes errors, and errors lead to mistrust. So until we wrestle with our desire, our insatiable appetite to know things happening in real time, I think it's going to be hard to fix the trust issues.
Anyone else? Our next question.
This is for the entire panel. The questioner asks, collective thoughts on Governor Matt Bevin blocking access to his Facebook, who are critical of his administration, and I guess that could be for Twitter and also perhaps for President Trump doing the same.
The media have no collective thoughts. We are a plural. We are the media. The media are. It's not the media is, even though news media usually say it that way. He shouldn't block people from his accounts. If he's interested in engaging with the public, he should engage with them. And he says, or his staff says, that people were knocked off because of abusive or profane posts, but these people deny that. And I think we're probably going to have a trial in federal court to see what the facts are.
It's a new landscape. If nothing else, obviously, Mr. Lamb, you were the most critical of Governor Bevin specifically in your comments. What do you think?
Well, I think Governor Bevin is a very smart man, and I think at his core he's a good man. I think he's challenged by the truth more than most, and because he has probably been called a liar more often than most of us, he's very comfortable calling other people liars. It just flows off his tongue. But he posted something on his Facebook that from a point of view that he took out of context to make a point. And I thought it might be useful to post the entire point of view following his rant. And a couple people commented. I made another comment, and then shortly after it disappeared. And I made the mistake of saying he deleted it. He didn't, or his people didn't. They hid it. And as soon as I made a public comment that my post was deleted because it might not have been favorable to him, well, guess what? It came back, and then he called me a liar. So, okay, I got set up for that one. That's on me. Okay, I didn't see that one coming. But listen, if you look at the comments that follow my editorials, you would think that I'm trying to organize a one-car funeral. All right? I don't want any friends. I just want to tick everybody in the world off. But we leave them up. If they aren't indecent, and if they're not, well, even sometimes when they're way off topic, we leave them up as long as they're not using profanity or they're slandering somebody else, we'll leave them up. The governor gets a lot of comments that are not favorable, but in pretty good time, a lot of them disappear. So I think that's disingenuous.
As Mr. Cross said, it's a new landscape, though, in terms of these are private companies of Twitter and Facebook and any other social media, and how people choose to use those, I guess, will be decided later on as far as public officials.
Let me stick up for the governor on this, although I don't think he should block people who are making civil commentary. If you look through, and you can now search online because the media has obtained it, if you look through the people that have been blocked, some of the accounts, many of the accounts, not all, but some of the accounts have absolutely been profane in nature. And if a citizen of Kentucky walked into the Kentucky governor's office and started ranting and raving profanity at anyone who would listen, they would be blocked from walking into the governor's office. You cannot stand in a public place like that and be profane and affect the operations of that office. And so I think in some cases he has absolutely faced, and some of these accounts may not even be real accounts. I mean, they may be bots, spam, and they've been blocked. So I think there has to be a balance struck here. And people, look, I block and mute people on Twitter all the time. I go on CNN. I went on today, and I had to talk about why the president hasn't tweeted about the mosque attack in Minnesota and why the FBI raided Paul Manafort's house the other day. And if you don't go on there and say, what the folks watching want to hear, I mean, you face a barrage. I know you get these in your office too. You face a barrage of profanity, hateful, vile things. And I block them or I mute them because I don't want to see it. And I don't think anybody ought to have to be subjected to that, particularly if they're profane.
And I don't think you should have to either, by the way.
Yeah. But there has to be a balance. I think there should be a balance.
Next question.
Okay, this is for the entire panel. Young people today get much of their news from Twitter. How can we have an informed citizenry if the audience doesn't get much info and if it's not accurate?
Brendan, you've been saying you've been doing some counseling, if you will, at the library?
Yeah, it feels like counseling. To go, earlier it was mentioned about Al, about the business and the economy. Like, I think what news organizations are providing is news and information that a consumer wants. And I think what we're seeing is less and less focus on the platform as more and more organizations are trying to provide it on all the platforms, right? You may want it delivered on your doorstep. You may want to listen to it in your vehicle. You may want to get it on social media. What I'm mostly concerned, of many concerns I have, the one I'm greatly concerned about is young people and the skepticism and their literacy skills. There are many groups trying to up that. I've talked to librarians, teachers throughout school systems here. It's happening across the country. How can we get them to better understand that there is fake news? I mean, as generations ago, the local newspaper, maybe it's public radio, these were kind of the stalwarts in the community. You turn to them for your news, but it's much different now. The internet's a wild, unregulated place, and there are people doing profane things. I don't have the answer. I can tell you I remain skeptical about Facebook and some of these organizations that say they want to combat that. These are publicly traded companies. They're providing, the vessel for news, information, and fake news. I think the cat's out of the bag. I think we're too far gone to really regulate or stamp out a lot of this malarkey. And I think we need to create better, smarter news consumers. And it starts with you, me, everyone here. Tell your friends, post about it on Facebook.
I spoke at a commencement recently, and I was telling the graduates that, you're going out into the world, bright-eyed and ready to change it. But you can't change the world if you don't understand what's going on in it. And I said, you need to be smart. And I don't mean Kardashian smart, I mean smart. Subscribe to a newspaper and read it. Watch television news 2 or 3 nights a week. Subscribe to a magazine, not People magazine, but subscribe to The Economist or Time. Educate yourself and prepare yourself to go out and change the world. And I got to say, in all honesty, a few of them looked up from their phones and nodded, so I think I got through.
They were tweeting about it, Bill.
Yeah.
Tweeting about it.
We have our next Twitter question. And maybe it'll go to Mr. Lamb again. Did the media whiff on coverage of Bevan's house? Turns out it wasn't worth what the media assumed, and the purchase wasn't a gift. Your station covered that.
Yeah, I think it would be a whiff if we continued to cover it, but I think that there were questions that had to be answered. The is it PVA? Is that what I'm looking for? They evaluated the home at $1 million more than he paid for it. That needs to be looked at, because he then took the guy who sold it to him and appointed him to a board. That needed to be looked at. Now, they've reappraised it. Maybe that's revisionist history, I don't know. But it seems to me that it's probably done. But no, we did not whiff. It needed to be looked at and questioned. And now that maybe it's resolved, you let it go and you move on to something else.
And in addition to the board appointment, the guy's a state contractor. There are plenty of reasons to look into that valuation of the property. The fact that the board decided it was overvalued doesn't mean it was any less legitimate a story.
And you can't be scared off from it because he's stamping his feet and screaming that it's not a story. It's not a story. I'll tell you what's a story. Oh, excuse me. Well, we won't cover that anymore. My God.
If the governor would sit back and think a minute, he might conclude that stamping and yelling actually makes people more interested in doing stories.
Our next question.
This plays along with the theme. The questioner asked, what responsibility do you put on the general public to be discerning of information? Should media outlets be more leading to challenge the audience to think for themselves? So, any of the panelists?
I mean, is that a media question or a societal question? I mean, think about civic life and what role each of us plays. I don't, we get a question a lot, oh, did the media whiff on the election and things like that? I mean, there's a finite number of journalists trying to do the work of a lot of people. And is it our job to, lead you to the water or provide answers to questions you might have in a transparent, honest, and accountable way?
Anyone else? All right, next. We have a whole stack of them. It's a matter of which one.
1 second. Okay. Here's one. Could journalism regain credibility by abandoning the pretense of objectivity and adopt the European model, labor, liberal, and conservative newspapers, etc.? Is that an option? We already have. Turn on your television. Fox News, CNN, MSNBC. I mean, they're covering the news from a point of view. And
I wouldn't say that of CNN. I think CNN's bias is really an entertainment bias. They try to, keep
Well, I
keep
agree.
you watching.
They have amazing entertainers that
Yeah.
work for CNN. I totally agree with you.
But the question is really about the newspaper model. 60 years ago, newspapers began to develop objectivity as an ultimate goal. That was driven partly by the consolidation of newspapers. You didn't have a Republican newspaper and a Democratic newspaper in a town. And it was better business-wise for that newspaper to appeal to everybody. And they got on their high horse and said, well, we're fair and objective and we treat everybody the same way. I think most of them lived up to that. In this modern environment, with people gravitating to news outlets that give them what they want instead of what they need, I think it would be very dangerous for the democracy for newspapers to try to go in that direction. You have to have some kind of generally consumed source of news that has a reasonable degree of confidence, or else you're not going to be able to have a proper public discussion of the issues. And it's the newspapers in this country that do the best job of uncovering the facts that need to be uncovered. And sure, there's bias on the editorial page. That's bias by definition. The key is keeping the bias out of the news product. And that has been a constant challenge from the start, and we just need to do a better job of doing that.
You know, back in the mid-'90s, there were two guys primarily who created the Fox News channel for Rupert Murdoch. One everyone knows, Roger Ailes. The other was a guy named Jack Abernethy. And Jack has, over the years, become a friend of mine, and we were playing golf one day, and I said, Jack, I have a really important question. How do you hire reporters and producers and writers who are conservative? How do you screen for that? Because if I tried to hire for that or tell our newsroom that we're going to be conservative or we're going to be liberal, I would have a mutiny. And that's the truth. And he said, we don't hire people based on their conservative bent. Conservative is our marketing strategy. We figured out that there was a vast number of people in this country who are conservative who were not being served. So we have liberal writers and producers and editors and reporters who come in, but they check their hats at the door and they market conservative and then they go home. I thought that was very, very interesting, and that's partly how the Fox News channel was built. It was an ideology of marketing, not an ideology of politics.
I do have a follow-up perhaps for Al first, and that is the recent phenomenon of quote-unquote the fake news title, if you will. Why do you think that the American public was so readily eager to sign on or to agree with that? In other words, isn't there some culpability on the part of the media, pardon me for using that word, the news media in the first place? In other words, was the environment already laid?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The last time that I think a majority of Americans had a high level of confidence in the news media was in the years after Watergate. And it's been on the slow decline ever since. Now it's down to about 32%. So, yes, they were capitalizing on the table that had been set for them.
We have a next Twitter question before we get to the ones from the rest of the forum. What is the best way to determine something is fake news? Is there a litmus test out there? Is there a way to tell the difference between cats and dogs?
The old saying is consider the source.
We have a little bit of a 5-step process we do in this workshop, but there are a couple things. Look up the report or the byline. First, does it have a byline? If it doesn't, that should raise a lot of questions, right? And we have some examples of some reporters from sites on all sides, Occupy Democrats, right? And you're trying to seek out the byline, and there's no footprint, right? A real news outlet today will have a footprint. Every reporter, Twitter, some background, maybe a LinkedIn page. But, as a citizen, you can do some of this really basic sleuthing, if you will, in mere moments on Google and some of the tools that are available, right? Look at some of the context in which this is presented in, right? Look at the ads. Look at the stories around the story that you're looking at. On and on. I mean, is it too good to be true? Right? My favorite example is the story that's in my Facebook feed about, oh my God, scientists say you can eat chocolate cake every day and lose weight. Like, really? I clicked on it. But again, not to keep harping on this, but I think part of this is on us. And if we all, especially, the younger generation, get a little hip to this and understand some of these basics, I think we'll all be better off. And, also let's join the debate, right? When you have that crazy uncle like I do that shares the conspiracy theories, and you can easily debunk it in a moment in a gentle manner, I suggest. Hey, Uncle Matt, that's not so true, right? It starts with us.
In my new position with the Kentucky Association of Electric Cooperatives, we actually publish the largest circulated magazine in the state, which is Kentucky Living. And we recently launched a new version of our website, KentuckyLiving.com. Check it out. But as part of that, we made a strategic decision, because we could, that we don't accept on our digital platform the outside advertisements that are often used by a lot of news media to make extra money. And when I think, and I'll be curious about any of your reactions or responses to this, this is where it's really confusing as far as the questioner from the Twitter is to say, how do I tell the difference? You said consider the source. The problem is you go to some of the sources, and on some of the websites of legitimate news media, there are sponsored content are little squares that come up that are fairly indistinguishable from the main stories, and they are, you know, the conspiracy theories, or I can't believe this person died, or, you know,
Or it's the clickbait, you know,
Right, it is.
the 10 best places in Kentucky to get an ice cream sundae,
right.
you know.
So I guess, I mean, I know we have to make money in the news media to keep the rest of the legitimate stuff going, but, you know, is that a mistake to accept advertising that's going to be clickbait, that's going to be on the same, share the same space?
I think the exigencies of the business say that you got to have that stuff on your site, but you need to segregate it in such a way that people can distinguish between that and real news.
Now, to this group, this is an easy, in determining the difference between fake news and real news. This is obviously a very intelligent group. This is not, you know, the folks, you may not even make it to the state fair. I don't know, but
I'm going to the state fair. That was Bill Lamb.
one car funeral. But listen, number one, know the difference between a news report and an opinion piece. Okay, an editorial. That's number one. If you're watching Fox News or MSNBC and you've got talking heads, they can tell you the same story completely differently. All right? So that isn't necessarily news, that's conversation. But if you go to, if you see a story on WHAS or on WDRB or in the Courier Journal by a legitimate reporter, remember that reporter has vetted that story. They've found 3 sources. They verified that that story happened. And so when you say consider the source of where you're getting your news. Because if you're getting it from real journalists, they have done the homework. They've done the legwork.
I think we have time for one final question, and then we'll hand it over to Greg.
Yes, please give your concerns and cures for the bias in the legitimate, honest media and its effect on public opinion and the divisions in our community.
Yeah, this is not going to help my street cred in the next time we get the Republican Party together. But most of the reporters I have interacted with have been pretty fair people. There have been some clearly in the tank for the other side, or clearly coming to the table with a preconceived idea of what they're going to write, and there's nothing you can do about it. That is the minority. The majority of them, hardworking, legitimate, eyes wide open, will consider your point of view. I want to go back to something Al said about whether we should, one of the questions about whether we should have newspapers that are disclosing the point of view from which they operate. I'll take the contrarian view. I think when you try to hide what's inside, that may, but your bias shows through anyway, that is credibility harming.
Yes, it is.
And if you were to tell people up front, hey, this is our point of view, then it might enhance your credibility to lean into it. We're going to cover the news from our perspective. That doesn't mean you have to make up facts, and it doesn't mean you have to, out of whole cloth, create stories, but it does mean you're disclosing on the front end, hey, we have a point of view, and here's the news. I actually think there's something credibility enhancing about that, and I think that it's one of the reasons I think the cable news model has worked. I mean, look, viewership of these cable channels is up. And some people are looking for things that affirm their point of view, but the fact that they're disclosing their point of view to their audience, I think, to me, if I'm watching MSNBC, I know what I'm getting. I don't have to sit there and wonder, what am I getting here? I know what I'm getting. Same for Fox. And I think the reporters that work for those outlets, in many cases, are actually very credible, mainstream reporters. But the fact that the networks do the marketing that Bill talked about that they do, it tells me what their point of view is, and it gives me a point of reference to know whether I find something credible. So I'll take the contrarian view and say that if more news outlets leaned into the point of view the way we've seen on cable, credibility might be enhanced.
Well, I'm not for leading into the point of view, but I'm for being more upfront and explanatory. If I were publishing a newspaper today, I would have on the editorial page every day, and I'd have it in a prominent place on the website, what this newspaper stood for. We'd explain that the opinions are reserved for the opinion page, and if you see opinions showing up in the news columns, let us know. And then have a short explanation of the elements of journalism by Tom Rosenstiel and Bill Kovach. I would recommend that book to every one of you.
I think this was a marvelous program. If you guys are like me, you heard some things that were thought-provoking and maybe some good stories that you'll pass on to other people as you talk with folks later today and tomorrow. We do have some mint julep cups for our speakers. And here we go, wrapped up beautifully. Only the finest wrapping paper here.
It's not a local newspaper, though. What's up with that?
Marvelous, marvelous.
How did you know? I recently got a bird. Thank you for this.
Oh, my. So once again, please join us for the September 13th meeting when Jefferson County Public School Acting Superintendent Marty Polio will be joining us. I think it will be a sellout, so reserve early. We are adjourned. Thank you.
I got to catch a plane.